President Trump is now thinking about sending checks to Americans called DOGE dividend checks. And it all started because Elon Musk went out and said that DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, has cut so much government waste that the government should consider sending out a $5,000 check to all Americans. And at first, everybody kind of brushed that idea off until just now. Because now President Trump has acknowledged the idea of DOGE dividend checks and says that they might be possible. Here's what President Trump just said. A DOGE dividend is possible because, quote, the numbers are incredible. So many billions, hundreds of billions, and that the refunds could be a lot. Now, if you're wondering, well, where is the government going to get this money to pay out these DOGE dividend checks? Or is this going to make inflation worse? Or what is this going to do to the economy or the stock market? Well, you are in the right place because that's exactly what I want to go over in this video. So let me start by answering this. Where would this money be coming from? And the way that it has been proposed as of now is this is not going to be a stimulus check like what we saw in 2020. It would be more of a tax refund. The stimulus checks were the government going deeper into debt to spend money by handing out these checks that they didn't have. This DOGE dividend check would essentially be the government spending less money and then passing on some of those savings back to American taxpayers in the form of a refund, in this case called a DOGE dividend. So how much are we talking? Well, the proposal, based off of what we know today, is giving 20% of DOGE's savings back to American taxpayers in the form of this refund. Now, why does this matter? Because the United States government has been spending a lot more money than they are generating through taxes. In 2024, the United States government generated $4.9 trillion in taxes, but they spent $6.9 trillion. So the government spent $2 trillion that they did not have in 2024, and they financed that through debt. And this is where DOGE is coming in and they are cutting expenses. They're laying people off, they're shutting down departments, they're shutting down government funding for certain things, and they're also finding waste to be removed. And this is where DOGE is saying, along with the president now, that because they're able to find a lot of savings, that some of these savings can be passed on to Americans in the form of a tax refund because we don't need as many taxes. But how much money are we actually talking about? Well, again, based off of the numbers that we have today, DOGE has said that they are currently in the process of cutting $55 billion in expenses. That's what they are saying as of today. These numbers have not been verified. This is just what DOGE is saying. So how much money are we talking? Well, let's assume that everybody doesn't get a check. Let's assume the checks are not given out to toddlers or middle schoolers. They're only given out to people over the age of 18. There are 260 million Americans over the age of 18. If all $55 billion of savings are sent out to those 260 million Americans, that means everybody gets $200, not $5,000. But that's based off of the numbers that we have today. Remember, DOGE says that they want to potentially save or cut somewhere between $500 billion to $2 trillion in government expenses, potentially annually. So here's what that looks like. If DOGE saves $500 billion in annual expenses, that would amount to $2,000 a person over the age of 18, assuming that every dollar of savings gets passed on, which that's not what they're proposing. If DOGE saves $1 trillion of expenses, that would mean essentially that every American gets $4,000 a person, assuming every dollar gets passed on. If only 20% gets passed on, well, now we're talking about $1,000 or so per person. But this ultimately will depend on how much money DOGE can actually save the government and then how much gets passed on back to American taxpayers. So this then brings us to the idea of, if this actually happens, what is this going to do with inflation? And this is one of the reasons why on March 11th, 2025, I'm hosting a free live and virtual wealth building workshop where I'm going over all the government changes and the economy changes that we're seeing happening right now, because a lot of things are happening, and how they create unique investment opportunities. So how do you find an investment opportunity based off of what DOGE is doing? How do you find the investment opportunity based off of tariffs? How do you find the investment opportunity based off of the new technologies and artificial intelligences and other Trump policies? That's what I'm going over on this workshop. It's completely free. It's live. It's virtual. I'm doing 2 workshops on March 11th, one at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then again at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's completely free. So if you want to join me on this workshop, all you have to do is click the link down in the description below to register, because there's a limited number of people that can actually join me live. So if you want to join on March 11th, I have the link for you down in the description. Now, when we talk about inflation, this one is very interesting because we know how the pandemic stimulus checks created or caused inflation, because the government had to go deeper into debt to now fund these stimulus checks. Inflation comes from the word inflate. What are we inflating? We're inflating the monetary supply. So when 2020 happened, we saw this whole new creation of dollars because the United States government had to borrow this money from the Federal Reserve Bank. And the Federal Reserve Bank, although they're called the Federal Reserve Bank, they're not federal, they're not a reserve, and they're not a bank. So the Federal Reserve Bank had to print these trillions of dollars, give it to the government, and then the government went out and passed these programs, which included stimulus checks, unemployment checks, PPP loans, and other grants for businesses. All this free money was given out, which was inflation. And then that ultimately caused the prices of things to go up, because when you create so many dollars, the value of each individual dollar goes down. Because if you could just print unlimited amounts of money, why do we have to pay taxes in the first place? Well, it's because that money printing creates inflation. This is a little bit different because the proposal, we don't know what's actually going to happen, but the proposal is taking some of the money that you paid in taxes and giving it back to you. It is a tax refund, essentially. I know it's called a DOGE dividend check, but the whole idea is taking some of the government spending, reducing it, taking the money that the government didn't spend, and then giving it back. But here's the interesting part. Here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Because the government is still running a deficit. The government is still spending money they don't have. So even if you reduce federal spending, well, we're still running a deficit as of today, because in 2024, it was a $2 trillion deficit. So if we cut spending by, let's just say $500 billion, you'd still be in a deficit. That's where things get a little bit tricky. That means we're still seeing the inflationary things happen. So deficit spending is always inflationary. Less deficit spending is less inflationary. And so what the government and DOGE is saying is we're taking the deficit from $2 trillion to, let's say, $1 trillion. And if we can reduce the deficit by this much, we can pay out a little bit of the difference to Americans. So is it inflationary? Sure, yes, not as inflationary as if you had $2 trillion deficit spending. So they're saying instead of having $2 trillion of deficit spending like what has been happening, we'll have less deficit spending with these checks for Americans, which is less inflationary than the $2 trillion of deficit spending. If that seems like a whole bunch of confusingness, stick with me. Because the whole idea here is we're trying to spend less money as the government, and the goal, not what might happen, the goal is to not create inflation by not printing the money, by sending money that wasn't spent. Now, we have seen surpluses happen in the government before. We are not at a budget surplus yet. A budget surplus is when the government generates a certain amount of tax dollars and they spend less than what they generate from taxes. It seems like a foreign concept, but this is not unheard of. The last time that the United States government saw a budget surplus was, do you want to guess? 2001, under President Bill Clinton. And during that time, when we saw the surplus, the money was given back to America. How did that happen? Well, it was given back to Americans in the form of strengthening Medicare by extending Social Security and reducing the national debt. Here, what the Trump and DOGE administration are saying is we're still probably going to be in a deficit right now. We'll have less of a deficit, but what we can do is with that less of a deficit, hand out checks to Americans. So still inflationary, but the goal of being less inflationary than what we saw in 2024. That's what it seems like the goal is based off of what we have seen and heard so far, based off of the proposals. Now you might be wondering, well, what would that do to the economy and the stock market? Well, let's put it this way. The economy loves when people got money to spend. The economy does not care if this money that you're spending is inflationary. The economy does not care when the money you're spending is debt. The economy does not care when the money you're spending is in your bank account. They just care that people are spending money. Walmart doesn't care how you get the money, they just want you to spend the money. They don't ask questions when you swipe your credit card, they just get happy when you swipe your credit card. And the problem is, some companies are starting to see some pain or uncertainty. For example, Walmart just came out and said that they are expecting to grow a lot slower in 2025 than they did in 2024 because of worries about an economic slowdown and because of worries about tariffs, because Walmart gets a lot of their stuff from China. And so if you are Walmart, if you are Kroger, if you are Amazon, if you are Apple, if you are Chipotle, and you hear your customers might get some free money, whether it's a tax refund or a check, businesses love the idea. They love the idea of stimulus checks, and they love the idea about tax refunds. That's why tax refund season correlates with a lot of sales at businesses, because when businesses know that Americans get tax refunds, they want to spend that money. This is not news. This is marketing 101. When Americans have money, marketers want to get you to spend that money. Hate it or love it, that's the way that our economy works. Our economy runs on Americans spending money. The more money you spend, the more money somebody else makes. That's why the stimulus check was not there to stimulate your bank account. It was there to stimulate the economy, which means they want you to go out and spend that money. So what would Dividend DOGE checks do to the economy? Well, it would probably stimulate the economy, because what we know is that when Americans get money in their pocket, they spend it. And when they spend it, who does that benefit? Well, it benefits the investors and the owners of those companies, period. So more reasons for you to be an investor. What does that mean for the stock market? Well, I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but if any sort of checks go out to people, that benefits investors. Because if investors see their companies making more money, they're going to be more excited. If more people are shopping at Chipotle, or if people have more money in their pockets to shop at Chipotle, well, that money then goes into the hands of Chipotle. Who does that benefit? Maybe the workers get a little bit of a raise, but the profits go into the hands of the investors. That's why inflation generally benefits asset prices, because inflation disproportionately hurts people while disproportionately benefiting asset owners. Every single person is a consumer. Inflation makes consumption more expensive. So when you, I don't care if you're rich, poor, or middle class, go to Chipotle, inflation means your guac is more expensive. Well, then inflation also means that the asset value, stock values generally go up, because as you have to spend more dollars for that guac, more dollars go into Chipotle, more dollars go into Walmart, more dollars go into Amazon's pockets. That's good for the investor. This is why you want to understand the system, because when people talk about stimulus checks in 2020, well, the real benefit of stimulus checks were not the beneficiaries of those stimulus checks. It was the people that got the checks after people spent it. It was the Walmarts. It was the Amazons. Because yeah, you might got a $1,000 check or $2,000 check, but if you go and just spend it at Walmart, they're the ones that actually know how to use their money. This is why you want to understand how the world works financially. Because the reality is, most people are just consumers and employees. But our economic system is designed to benefit investors, period. If you want to win, you have to become an investor and not rely on DOGE checks. And this is where now understanding how this works is important. Because will it be inflationary? Potentially. Because we haven't seen a reduction in deficit spending. I mean, we've seen a reduction, but we're not seeing no more deficit spending. Once we get into a budget surplus, now we don't got to worry about the inflationary issues. Maybe it's less inflationary, but less inflationary could still mean inflationary. But that's why, again, understanding how those checks could benefit investors is important, because at the end of the day, the way that you win is not by trying to get a $2,000 check from the government, it's by owning the assets that really benefit. Because what we have seen is that over the last 5 years, wages have gone up by around 20%. Inflation has been around 23%. The stock market has gone up by around 80%. You pick which side you want to be on. Do you want to hope for a check from the government as your way to building wealth? Or do you want to own the assets that are actually benefiting? Now, assets don't always go up. Markets go up and down. We've seen 16 recessions over the last 100 years. But over the long term, we know that investors are the ones that are building wealth. And that's why I'm hosting this workshop on March 11th, where I'm going to be going over all the changes that are happening, because there's changes happening faster than a lot of people expected. How do those create investment opportunities? I have the link to that workshop down in the description. That's also why on Market Briefs, which is my free financial newsletter, my team is breaking down what's happening in the financial markets, in the stock market, in the economy. That way anybody can understand and be up to date in the financial markets. It's a free newsletter. I have that link for you down in the description. But I'm going to say this again. This is so important for you to understand because it is becoming more and more important for you to become an investor, to become financially savvy, because the people that understand this are going to be able to build wealth, and the people that don't are going to be left behind. That is how our economic system works. And when you get it, you can win. If you don't, you're going to be the person that's making everybody else rich. And I want you to be on the side that understands this. That way you can take better care of yourself, so you can take better care of your family, and so you can take better care of your community, because relying on the person in the White House, no matter who is in the White House, is never a winning strategy. I want you to be the person that takes care of your house instead of relying on the White House to take care of your house. And with that, I will see you on YouTube tomorrow.